The Quran does not say,
Hold on there a second, Pooh. Why are we debunking a video from 2007?
It's still relevant.
Hey guys, sandwiches?
Heathen, we're talking about something important here. Go back to the kitchen.
It still causes abuse worldwide.
But Pooh, look at him. In this video, he still has hair on his head. This video is like YouTube Stone Age.
Some cupcakes, perhaps?
Heathen, back to the kitchen. Old or not, it's still relevant, and who cares what the guy looks like?
But he grows ginger pubes on his...
Red velvet cookies?
Ooh. Okay, sold. Let's do this.
the Quran does not say, and the man can beat his wife, just like that.
Hi, Greenie. I see you skipped the introduction completely. Very well, I shall oblige. The verse you're talking about is Surah An-Nisa, verse 34. Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other, and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. There is so much wrong with this passage, from the obvious idea that righteous women act a bit like trained golden retrievers, to the idea that not the actual arrogance, but the mere fear of arrogance, is what gives you permission to intervene. And then this wonderful set of solutions with, advise them, hey, I'm afraid you will be arrogant, don't do it, to then forsake them in bed. Hey, Sarihan, I'm afraid you're going to be arrogant, so no sex, to then beat them. Sarihan, I'm afraid you're going to be arrogant with me, so I'm going to abuse you preventively. Okay, enough from my side. Let us hear what Greenie has to say about this.
The Quran is clearly telling, first of all, that Allah has given the man a responsibility to ensure that his family, his wife, his children are following the straight path that leads to Allah, the straight path that leads to paradise and goes away from the hellfire. This is the responsibility the man has been given.
So you're saying that Muslim men have a responsibility to their wives and children to control their thoughts. We're only 30 seconds into your video and you've already admitted that thought crime is a punishable offense in every Islamic household around the world, and that it's a husband's responsibility to police his family's thoughts and opinions. There's that feminism in Islam again for you. You'd think that if Islam was a true liberator of women, it would say something along the lines of, Allah sends astray whom he wills and guides unto himself who turns to him in repentance. Oh wait, it does say that. Surah 13, Ayah 27. And it even says again, Surah 35, Ayah 8, Verily, Allah sends astray whom he wills and guides whom he wills. And according to Surah 2, Ayah 106, you're supposed to give precedence to later verses of the Quran, which contradict earlier ones. So why in the fuck do you think it's your responsibility to lead your wife to Islam when Allah has already made it painstakingly clear that the decision of whether your wife chooses to follow Allah is his to make, and not yours? If Allah ultimately chooses whether your wife will be led astray, then beating her isn't going to affect her decision at all. Why am I a better Muslim than you?
Also, his interpretation has rather jack shit to do with the actual verse.
Now, all of us recognize, for example, that any government has the responsibility to care for its citizens. Is that true or not?
You're correct. However, it's not the government's responsibility to police and control people's thoughts and beliefs. Ideally, the purpose of government is to protect each person's individual freedom to live however they choose to live, up until their expression of that freedom interferes with other people's ability to live freely. What you're doing is trying to justify infringing on women's rights under a guise that makes men look like they're protecting women rather than controlling them.
Since when does a government caring for its citizens imply that when they get arrogant they should be beaten? Aside from the fact that one of the core necessities for human development is being able to express one's opinions, even if unpleasant to others, main reason being that if you want to improve a flaw, you need to be allowed to point out the flaw in the first place, there's a reason we dislike countries who have a soft spot for physical abuse for the crime of dissidence. And that is because governments who need to be abusive to their population to keep them in line are oppressive cavities of digestive discharge. Or, if you want the more scientific term, shitholes.
And does not every government have the responsibility to prevent criminal action? Yes or no?
Yes, the government is responsible for implementing laws which are put into place for the purpose of deterring crime. And when criminals commit crimes, they're punished in a way that's proportional to the severity of the crime, which is another way the legal system deters crime. But I really don't like that this is your argument. Men are the upholders of Sharia law, therefore women must obey their husbands or face criminal charges because not believing in a law and thinking for yourself is definitely a crime. I'd ask how you don't hate yourself for spewing all this crap, but I have to imagine that a power-hungry monster like yourself spares no opportunity to remind Muslim women that they are second-class citizens. And a little pussy like you is definitely going to need a God's help to remain the dominant force in Islam, because the second women are allowed to think for themselves, they'll be dancing mental circles around you like Iseth and I already are.
What about me?
Exactly. What about you? Also, where are my cookies? By the way, Greenie, I don't know in what Ali in Wonderland style world you live, but every not completely incompetent government, actually often even those, usually punish you for a crime after you committed it, not before. Unlike the fear of arrogance verse you're talking about, where the so-called government seems much more into punishment than actually enforcing a law. But if you really want to call arrogance a crime and advocate for preventative violence to deal with it, I'm fairly certain here in hell I can easily find a fancy little rake and other middle-aged utensils for some nice daily crime prevention routine to protect you from your own evil, sinful, criminal tendencies of arrogance, Greenie. Believe me, you above all really need it.
Isn't it the responsibility of government to arrest the thieves and the murderers and the rapists
You really just...
and to do something with them to prevent that happening and to prevent that evil spreading in society? Is that not the duty of government? Yes or no?
Did you really just compare women who don't obey their husbands and a law to murderers and rapists? I have no words.
Oh, I do have a few words for you, Greenie. For a start, don't pretend like your faith is very deterrent of rapists, because abusing or even killing the victims constantly just doesn't seem to be very efficient in reducing the number of perpetrators. It simply makes families who have daughters and wives get paranoid about them. Although, to the credit of your culture, you do have a lot less reported domestic sexual abuse. But that might be more connected to the fact that raping one's wife is not considered rape, and less with the actual number of men who do or do not rape. And last but not least, how exactly is not being obedient to the husband the equivalent of rape? Is every time I'm disagreeing with you rape too? That is so SJW, not even our snowflakes can keep up with it.
And don't we all recognize that governments are allowed to use some type of force in order to arrest such people and to prevent them from their harm? Yes or no?
The answer is yes, but governments are only allowed to use such force on people who have already demonstrated that they are guilty or are suspected of being guilty of some sort of crime. Then the suspect is legally allowed to accept the charges placed against him, or plead not guilty and fight against the charges and any incriminating evidence. The crime in your case, however, is thought crime, and the person who judges whether a punishable crime has been committed is every Muslim man with a wife. The issue with that is that these judgments are going to be subjective, and the definition of thought crime is going to vary from household to household, which means women have to obey their husbands and the Quran or face the consequences without any chance of being able to defend themselves. So you're basically telling women you can have any model and color car you want as long as it's a 2015 blue Honda that's been pre-approved by your local car overlord, and if he says you have to change the color to neon pink for whatever reason, you absolutely fucking better if you know what's good for you. And you may get fined preemptively for wrong parking if your overlord is worried you might eventually park in the wrong spot. So ladies, you can live however it is you want to live as long as you do it according to the Quran and what your husband says, which is basically limiting you to being a housewife and a footstool.
Is there one place on the face of this earth except maybe some little island somewhere there's only 10 people, and they're all related maybe, where you don't have a police force who has to arrest people, who prevents riots, who prevents evil. Is this true or not?
How about you comment on islanders after you've chosen a prophet who didn't marry 7-year-old girls?
You have every country, every place in the world, this exists. Yes or no? Yes. So we recognize that those in authority have the right to use force if they have to prevent some evil taking place.
Well, let me start with pointing out that especially in less developed countries, the law is not equally implemented on the entire territory, mostly due to lack of resources or simply because the locals are too stubborn to allow the country to enforce them, or too few in numbers for the country to care. So no, not every place of the world has government-enforced laws. But I'm just being nitpicky here. You have a much worse flaw in your thinking. You see, governments are not a monolith. Most people prefer a government in which they have at least a tiny bit of a say. And they tend to dislike things like dictatorships, where they're basically under the mercy of a single dictator's whim who potentially changes the rules every 5 seconds. When you're talking about government, you're talking about the latter one. A dictatorship where the rules can be made up on the fly by the man of the house without any recourse, and enforced from means he can equally make up on the fly. And all he needs for that is a vague little passage of a book that no one can challenge. I dare you to tell me that the force used in these kind of governments is really a people-approved granted right, and not just a selfish power play.
Dictatorships fail because of how much they are hated by the people who are oppressed by them. We Westerners recognize that those in authority have an obligation to make and enforce laws which reflect the opinions and morals of the citizens they serve, regardless of religious affiliation. It's because Western governments recognize that not everyone follows the same religion, if any, that religion will never affect the way laws are passed. What you're referring to is a theocracy, where laws are dictated by what everyone's favorite book is, and the enforcers of that theocracy are men with permission to beat their wives for stepping out of an arbitrarily drawn, subjective line.
What is the problem, therefore, that Islam has given the head of the household some allowance to use a type of force in order to prevent his family from falling into evil?
And this is the part where you justify men beating their wives into submission. Allow me to take this highly controversial stance by saying you're not doing anyone any favors by beating the evil out of them when your definition of evil is a reluctance to live by the Quran. You think it's evil for a woman to think for herself and decide for herself that maybe religion isn't her cup of tea. I think it's evil for a man to tell his wife that she better listen to her husband if she knows what's good for her.
Greenie, you act as if there ought not to be a single problem with what you say, when in fact every sentence of yours has so many problems that I fear to monopolize the video if I keep pointing them out to you. Let us start with the obvious first. The beating verse refers to husband and wife, not the entire household. Though I'm very certain that if someone likes to get physical with his wife, he won't have many restraints to broaden it onto his entire family. Next, let's talk about who grants who what here. Islam is an outdated dogma given to us by some primitive desert tribe person who has a 6th century understanding of life. That's basically like having to listen and obey to your gay-bashing great-uncle, but then just a meta version from 1.5 millennia earlier. So that kind of dusty old piece of dogma has the power to give the always male-only head of the household the allowance to use his sky-daddy given physical force to apply violence onto his wife. And as if the mere existence of such a divine nonsense power in your holy book is not already bad enough, the necessary criteria to be able to make use of it is a vague prevention to do evil clause. In other words, the allowance to be violent not just when evil is done, with evil being defined so clearly that it can refer to, well, everything if one gets creative enough, but with the allowance to use violence when someone fears that evil could be done. In other words, when nothing has even happened yet.
Hey, Boo.
Yeah, babe?
You can have any opinions you want as long as you pull them from the Quran.
That doesn't leave me with a whole lot of options, does it?
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
And if I refuse?
Well, when you die, you'll burn in hell for eternity. And to remind you of this, I squeezed daily beatings into your schedule somewhere between doing the dishes and praying for forgiveness for being a dirty thing for yourselfer. Oh, and by the way, wear this headscarf.
Why?
Quran.
This is really oppressive and fucked up.
I know, right? It's awesome. It's so easy to control you when you think it's best that I think for you.
And that force has conditions on it, and it has prerequisites to it. The first thing the Quran mentions, if you perceive some evil, or if you see some evil, this means some evil, some Islamic evil, something that is haram, something that is disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Let us just get on the same page here for a moment. Women are told that in order to obey Allah, they have to obey their parents, their husband, and their husband's parents too. All of that, they are told, is Allah's will. So if they don't obey their man, they disobey Allah automatically. And if they don't make the mother-in-laws shopping, clean their floors, cook for them, or whatever else those in-laws come up with, then they too disobey Allah. And this often turns young wives into basically free sex and labor sources, which are completely undocumented by authorities because after all it's perfectly legal. Disobedience to Allah in this context is not a restriction. It's an excuse.
An excuse for you to beat your wife for even attempting to live for anyone but you and a book. You know, sometimes these Islam debunks can be kind of difficult to write a script for, but other times they just hand us these arguments. It's just depressing that in 2018 we actually have to take a stance against wife beating.
And Allah also mentions in these same ayat that the believing women, they are obedient to their husbands and they guard in their husband's absence their chastity.
I get so fucking angry looking out at the sea of future wife beaters. I wonder how many of them are excited to go home and show their wives what they learned in school today.
It fascinates me how it implies that only obedient women are believers. Hey, if your wife thinks for herself and isn't obedient enough, she's clearly an infidel. Might as well beat it out of her. Yeah, that will totally not devolve into a defective society, right?
So if someone sees that his wife is going astray or his family is going astray, then Allah has given a system of correction to prevent this crime that will lead to something much worse than prison, lead to the hellfire.
No. Allah has given the man a system to harmfully remind his wife to be good, because else she will end up in an Allah-made imaginary nasty place after her death to be roasted forever. Be beaten and abused now and obey and get to heaven, or be tortured forever later. What a lovely cult. Doesn't stink like sinister manipulation and control at all, right? By the way, just as a side note, unlike the Christian God who ought to be good, Allah has no such restrictions. He isn't good, he's just merciful. And that also only when he feels like it. Which means that you can't even try to drag that poor woman out of her mental misery of feeling the need to stay with an abusive husband because she fears the afterlife so much, by for example trying to make her ponder over the fact that divine goodness doesn't quite fit with hellfire.
First, Allah said to the man to admonish the wife. First you tell her, like you would tell anyone, giving them dawah, with maw'idha, with a nice exhortation. وَجَدِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and explain to them in the nicest way. بِالْحِكْمَةِ, with wisdom.
So step 1, try to re-brainwash your wife. Good idea. Saves you from running the risk of hurting your hand on her face.
Oh my wife, don't you see that Allah said this? And don't you see that the Prophet ﷺ said that?
And don't you see that Allah can go fuck himself? I'm a strong, independent woman who don't need no God.
And aren't you afraid of Allah's punishment? And don't you want Allah's reward?
No, frankly, I just don't give a fuck. Allah can judge me when I die. It's not your responsibility to make anyone but yourself a good Muslim.
And this is the wisdom and the benefit and the reasons behind this, that you should do this and this and this. So this is the first stage of advising his wife, of exhorting her, of teaching her, of reminding her.
Greenie, I find it kind of funny how you got from the single word admonish to you have to give her explanation and reasoning and treat her like a person to whom you make dawah. Because if that's what the verse means, then it's abysmally phrased. And I have to say, even if that would be what the verse means, it doesn't make the verse any better. Whether you give her a sensible explanation as to why your wife ought to do what you want her to do, or just threaten her with violence, doesn't change the fact that if she disagrees, you're allowed to resort to violence.
If this does not work, then he can take another step. And another step is that he turns his back on her in the bedroom. He turns his back on her.
Buddy, listen, I don't know how marriages work in Islam, but in the West, when a man pisses off his wife, it's typically the wife who takes sex away and not really the other way around. I'm pretty sure if you think you're the one taking sex away as a punishment, it's really because she's letting you think that.
Because it is something the wife loves from the husband. That he is affectionate towards her, even in the physical sense. It's something that the woman loves from her husband.
Just because the Quran says your wife wants your dick doesn't mean your wife wants your dick, buddy. And in your case, I bet you're doing her a favor.
I know that there is a lot of sexual repression going on in heavily indoctrinated religious sects. But generally, affection is not just given to you in the bedroom alone. And if it is, chances are you're not really affectionate in a bedroom either. Either way, it's a stupid idea, because if you are a nice person and your wife cares, she will likely do something you want because she wants to do you a favor, not because you stop having sex with her. And if you're a nasty person, then Boo is spot on, because chances are your wife can't stand those nighttime intercessions with you anyway. And there is one more thing. Women are not men. Women don't need to remove some odd steadily increasing internal pressure every so often. They have this very weird ability to be able to stay without sex basically forever. And if your book was even remotely as divine as you claim it to be, it would kind of be aware of that and take it into consideration when giving relationship advices. But somehow this book just doesn't seem to have these insights. It's nearly as if some ignorant man wrote it who has no clue about women. I wonder why. However, I have to put in a little caveat here, by pointing out that if you have several wives, and the wife in question cares about you, not sharing bedtime with her, but instead with one of the other wives, may actually have an effect. However, even there I question the utility of that strategy, because you're basically trying to submit a woman and make her more obedient and chaste by indirectly encouraging her to seek out another place to get her affection.
Actually, if the husband is already like a cold fish to his wife, and only, hardly ever hugs her or kisses her, and, they don't even hardly look at each other except, once a month or something like that, then I don't suppose that him turning his back on her is going to have much effect,
So what, if you're already a cunt to your wife, then skip step 2? Or maybe you should do some self-reflection to see if you're the reason your wife wants nothing to do with you and your fucked religion. Fucking Islamic relationship. Men, if your wife doesn't listen to you and your default setting is bastard, just start hitting her. That'll solve everything. Nothing like punching your wife to bring smiles to the dinner table. Sorry, hon, you just didn't seem like you were praying hard enough, so if you don't want to get hit, maybe stop asking for it.
But this is not how the relationship between the husband and the wife should be in Islam.
Hey, for once, I think we can actually agree on something, you sick son of a bitch.
What a pity that Islam doesn't quite seem to agree with you there, Greenie. You see, the above surah is not the only one where violence comes up. There is another one, Surah 38, verse 44, where Allah told Job it was better to take a bushel of 100 thin grasses and beat his wife once than breaking his oath that he would beat her 100 times. In other words, an oath to Allah to be violent to your wife is more important than not beating your wife, even if you kinda don't want anymore. And then I could go into detail how several hadiths show a huge amount of violence, with Muhammad striking Aisha and Muhammad's companions having loose fists with daughters, wives and female sex slaves. But the same way Christians often argue which Bible version is accurate, Muslims heavily disagree on which hadiths are accurate. And so this would only end up in a giant no-trust-Scotsman mudsling fest. Nothing wrong with mudslinging as long as the mat is not dry and hard as a rock.
We are garments one for the other. The Prophet ﷺ used to play with his wives. He used to joke with them. They used to race with each other. They used to take showers. They used to take ghusl together, and him and Aisha would fight to take the water from the bucket.
Who gives a fuck that Muhammad wasn't a complete and total cockbite to his wives? Is that supposed to somehow make me feel better about the fact that he gave himself and millions of Muslim men for centuries to come permission to beat their wives? And it's because this abuse is ordained in the Quran that abuse is rampant in places where Islam is the most prevalent religion. So if the Quran was written to maximize obedience and minimize spousal abuse, it failed tremendously. That is, unless the book really wants you to beat your wife constantly. Maybe it is the only real way to have a successful marriage under Islam.
This is Islam. This is how the affection should be between the husband and the wife. The best of you are those who are best to their wives. And I, the Prophet ﷺ said, am the best to their wives.
I was looking up affection in the Quran and relationship and whatever other synonym came to my mind, because I was curious to see if the Quran says anything remotely related to what you're actually claiming there. But the only verse that has even anything to say about affection says simply that God made man and woman and affection between them. That's it. No command to be nice and loving and affectionate to each other. Nothing. But you know what it does say in the Quran? It has a verse telling you that if you're afraid your wife doesn't obey, you can strike her.
Greenie, do you maybe have a graph or something demonstrating a positive correlation between the success rate of marriages and the rate at which you should beat your wife? I'm just saying, maybe if beating your wife had a 100% success rate, the Quran wouldn't also need to state that adultery is wrong. You would just beat your wife happy and she'd never leave.
So this is how Islam should be. So if your relationship is like that, then you turn your back on your wife is going to feel sad. And she, inshallah, she's going to relent to that. Even if this after some time does not work, then the husband is allowed to prevent her from evil, to apply some type of physical force.
And we finally get to your favorite step, asshole. The part where you get to beat your wife for being a slimy, scum-sucking idolater.
It's fascinating to see how you try to circle around this issue like a turd in a toilet that tries to avoid the unavoidable flush. We're 6 minutes into the video, and after all sorts of apologetics, you finally get to address the point and make sure to not use the actual word from the Quran, but instead to say, apply some type of physical force. As if it was some sort of cream that you smear on your face or something. Physical force, apply 3 times a day to prevent evil, gym possession and adultery. Greenie, you know the verse is bad. You know that beating your spouse is bad. But because the Quran condones it, and the Quran in your cult has to be perfect, you are forced to make all sorts of excuses instead of simply condemning and denouncing it.
This is a type of very light beating. In fact, as some scholars mentioned, it is with just to hit with the miswak. But Allahu alam. What we know from the Prophet ﷺ is this type of beating is not allowed to leave any type of mark. It is not allowed to break the skin. It is not allowed to break a bone or even leave a mark on the skin.
Oh, so you just lovingly and gingerly beat your wife in a way that doesn't leave any evidence? How convenient for you. Not only do you get to hit your wife into submission, but nobody will take her seriously if she tries to get help. Muhammad really did think of everything.
Yeah, I thought the niqab was worn by Muslim women because they're considered precious diamonds or something, not because it lowers the chances of bruising her face and hides the bruises when she does.
A type of very light beating.
What kind of beating?
Very light beating.
And what does light beating look like exactly?
Is not allowed to leave any type of mark. It is not allowed to break the skin. It is not allowed to break a bone or even leave a mark on the skin.
Just to get my bias out straight away, I am an anti-beating absolutist. In my opinion, if you need to beat people to make them listen to you, you're a complete idiot and too dumb to come up with an actual argument. Especially if we're talking about an adult. Now, having said that, if I see a mother place a slap or 2 on a kid's bum after he nearly ran under a car, I'm not gonna call Child Protection Service because of it. But this is not the kind of light beating we're talking about here. Your idea of light beating is pretty much everything that doesn't get you into trouble with authorities. And none of these restrictions you pointed out are even remotely present in the Quran. Before, I simply thought you just want to candy code a verse that is a bit nasty and pretend it's a metaphorical sort of strike. But I was clearly wrong. You should rename your speech to How Not to End Up in Jail for Being an Anger Management Lacking Shitbrick.
A beating that is that severe is forbidden, and this is a type of assault. And it's haram and a crime in Islam to treat your wife like that.
Oh, well, at least you have standards.
Greenie, considering what you consider light beating, I don't really want to guess what severe beating looks like in your household. But I wouldn't be surprised if it involves a demolition crane.
But a type of physical reprimand in order to bring her to goodness is allowed. This is not an excuse for a man to beat his wife.
You can't just say after giving a room full of men an excuse to go home and beat their wives that you didn't just give them an excuse to go home and beat their wives. That does not absolve you of all responsibility if anyone goes home after listening to your speech and beats his wife.
I'd say he's personally responsible.
I would agree.
It's not allowed. Just for any reason, because you're angry, you're upset, because, oh, the dinner's not ready. What is this? This is not the way. This is not Islam at all.
Greenie, seriously, can you for once listen to yourself without the brain turned off? Yes, of course you can beat your wife, but only if she's evil in the eye of God, and only after you told her and didn't sleep with her. And then, make sure that you don't beat her so much that she has visible marks or something, alright? But remember, beating your wife is totally un-Islamic. How can you not see that your religion flat out facilitates abuse and causes misery to countless women and kids? How can you not see that your inability to just flat out condemn this verse, or at least call it outdated and no longer applicable, has devastating effects on your society? I bet you can see it. But you don't really care, do you? After all, you will never be the one who's on the other side of the feast, will you?
In fact, the Prophet ﷺ hated that people should beat their wives. He did not like that people should beat their wives. In fact, he said, the best of you are not those who beat their wives.
Well, he didn't not like it enough to make it impermissible, just enough to say, don't take your day out on her, but if she gives you a little lip, you know, throw out a jab, set the tone, remind her who's boss. Alhamdulillah, thank you for letting me beat my wife for her own good.
Well, that was depressing.
It sure was. Sick how religion can mess up people.
Well, lucky us for having been born in the West.
Heathen, back into the kitchen.
Thank you all for watching. If you are from my channel, please follow the link to Kind Heathen and pressure him with your subs to make more content. If you are from his channel, please feel free to come to mine and pressure me to make more content. Please like, share and leave us a comment. And if you really like what we do, consider supporting us on Patreon. And just a reminder for the guys, remember that April is Testicular Cancer Month, and I really want you to stay around for a very long time, so please make sure to check yourselves regularly. Thank you very much and have a great day.